What's new, everybody? Appreciate you joining us. I'm Joey Powell. This is InsideCarolina.com's network of podcasts, and you're listening to another episode of the Coast to Coast, brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Coast to Coast podcast time here on InsideCarolina.com. I am your host, Joey Powell. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming in, listening to us, watching us if you're on YouTube. However you're consuming this show, we appreciate your time. As always, want to bring in the two guys who make this show what it is, the two that you are here to hear from. Sean Moran, Sherrell, McMillan. Sean, how are you, man?
Doing well.
Yeah, have a good Thanksgiving.
Besides for Friday night, yep.
Yeah, well, I was going to avoid that, right? See, here you go, just taking a crap all over our show, and I was not expecting that, but I appreciate you. For those who can't see, if you're listening to this, if you can see, Sean has a very fall shirt on, so I'm giving you a +1 in the attire column for tonight. Sherrell, as usual, decked out in all Jumpman everything. Sherrell, how are you, man?
I'm all right. My Thanksgiving was good until about was 7:30 on Thursday. Overtime, four pass
Oh man,
interference calls.
yeah,
It was a rough sports weekend in general, I would say,
yeah.
for me
It's,
personally. Yeah.
I could see where that would be a tough thing. Well, I was gonna say let's talk about some things that are a little bit better, but I don't know that UNC basketball at the moment is going to be that thing. But nevertheless, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. First thing I want to talk about is something on the recruiting front. Sherrell, you posted this on the InsideCarolina.com message boards earlier. I think it was yesterday, maybe it was earlier today. But you've got a little bit of a nugget about G.G. Jackson. I'll let you share that, and then kind of if you would elaborate for our listeners what that means and how it pertains to his overall recruitment and his potential college selection.
So Gigi Jackson is a 2023, I would say, power forward. He's a four from Columbia, South Carolina. He goes to Ridgeview High School. He's essentially a top 10 consensus kid in the country. I think some people might have him lower because they haven't updated his rankings, but he is that type of player. So he officially visited UNC during late night back in October, and that was his first official visit. And so some time went along where they were trying to set stuff up with different schools, and eventually they settled on going to Georgetown last weekend, and they were scheduled to go to Virginia this past weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. That trip didn't happen; it was canceled. So the plan right now is to be at UNC on Wednesday for its matchup against Michigan in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and there are no other visits on the docket as of right now. So this will be his third visit to UNC since June. He took an unofficial in late June, about 10 days after picking up an offer from Hubert Davis on June 15th. So you kind of have to like the position of North Carolina with this third visit coming up and no other visits on the schedule. The Virginia visit canceled. He has been to South Carolina a couple of times I think, for a practice and for an exhibition game. But I do think this is one that the North Carolina staff feels good about. And we'll just have to see where things go over the next, I would say 4 to 6 weeks.
Well, we appreciate that update, and certainly, like you said, I think the big thing for our listeners and Inside Carolina subscribers here is kind of read what that means, right? It's not that he's committed to UNC, it's not that he's committed to Georgetown, but it's just more of looking that if a visit that was planned gets canceled, read into that what you will. I think you do a great job of kind of putting the facts out there, letting folks kind of deduce what's there, Sherrell. So I appreciate that. All right. That is the recruiting point of the evening. Unless, Sherrell, do you have anything else that needs to go into the show that I'm missing?
There may be another visitor on Wednesday. I won't say the name. It's not gonna make anybody go crazy.
Not
But
going to break the
if we're,
internet.
right, it won't break the internet. But if we're able to confirm it, we will. So just keep an eye on that because it is a pretty huge game for UNC.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that game in just a little bit. Um, I think now the biggest thing to get to, and I want to let you guys really kind of show out on this episode of the show because I think there's a lot of talk around the Tar Heels, and we didn't have a show last week. There's a lot of talk around the Tar Heels right now that is just so hot button and so, I don't know, mercurial, I think is a great way to put it. And not that anyone expected the Hubert Davis era to begin without hiccup, but I do think the fact that it went from everything is cool to whoa, WTF is quite jarring, at least to this guy. So what I want to do first is let's talk about what happened. We didn't have a show last week, but UNC went up to Uncasville, Connecticut, and played really, really well against Purdue, who I think is a potential Final Four team, and then just absolutely looked as listless and lackluster against Tennessee as they could. Tennessee, again, top 15 team, depending who you want to believe, but UNC did not play well in any way, shape, or form in that game. You heard some things from Hubert Davis and some comments from the players after that game that you thought, okay, well, with having Sunday off and then being able to, having Sunday to come back and then having Monday off and playing Tuesday against UNC Asheville, that the game would have been a get-right situation where the Tar Heels would probably come out with their hair on fire like most folks would expect them to. That didn't happen. The Tar Heels won against Asheville 72-53, but I think the three of us, and speak up if I'm wrong, I think the three of us can say that Asheville's just not a very good team right now. Yes?
Correct.
Correct. All right. Sherrell says nothing, but I'm assuming he's playing along here.
UNC is just a little more gifted, Joey.
Oh, wow. That's a throwback quote for you. Guys, obviously some folks are concerned with the way the team is performing in various assets. I think individual players, but also, the team as a collective. I want to get your thoughts about the win over Asheville, and Sean, I'll go to you first. Is there such thing as a bad win when you're in the midst of the transition in the style that North Carolina is in, going from a Hall of Fame, 3 national title winning, program legacy type coach to Hubert Davis? Is there a such thing right now in November as a bad win?
It's a good question. I mean, it's better than a bad loss, losing to somebody at home like that. So I think taking the win, but obviously how it happened. I thought the first 15 minutes actually was decent. They were throwing the ball over the court a little bit, but they had 35 points, with 6 minutes to go. And then that's when they hit the brakes and only scored 10 minutes over the next 13 or so minutes, which was very, very tough to watch offensively. So in terms of a bad win, it definitely didn't do anything to offset, the previous weekend where they went 0-2. But going back to that Purdue game, we talked about it the week before, and it hurt when I said I thought Purdue was a national championship contender. And UNC, they were down the majority of the game, but when they did come back and had that wide open 3 to go up 3, they're going toe to toe up to that point, and then they gave up that extremely quick 9-0 run. So if it had only been a 1-game series, I think you come out of that and say, okay, they should at least showed something. But then that Tennessee game was so listless and lack of energy that there's that kind of goes into your bad win question from this week.
Sherrell, I'm going to come to you next. Looking at the Tennessee game and the performance in Asheville back-to-back, again, I'm taking away that the Asheville game was a win. I'm looking just at the team performing to their own standard. What are the major flaws that UNC is experiencing right now?
I think the biggest flaw is chemistry. And when I say chemistry, that has a negative connotation. And I don't mean to say that the guys don't like each other or there's internal discord. I don't know about what's going on in the locker room. But I think chemistry should be expected to be an issue. I mean, anytime you bring in, you return 5 starters, because RJ Davis started a good amount of games last season. And then Caleb Love, Leaky Black, Kerwin Walton, and Armando Bacot. So you're essentially returning 5 starters. You're returning a rotation player in Anthony Harris, who saw some minutes towards the end of the year. So that's 6 guys coming back. And then 2 pretty high impact transfers in Manick and Garcia. And then the guy who the coaching staff really likes, in McCoy, as well as 2 freshmen. So they never played together. They've had a couple of exhibition games. This is the 6th game of the season. You would expect there to be chemistry because they don't know each other that well on the court. You can only do so much in practice. So I just think they need to get used to being with each other on the court, figuring out where they like the ball, how to help off rotations, when to switch, all that good stuff. That just takes time, and it's repetition, and it's just happens over time. It can't happen immediately. I don't think there's ever been a team. Well, y'all correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there's ever been a team that had instant chemistry, and the second they stepped on the court for the first time, they looked completely 100% in sync. If there has been, I'll eat that. But it seems like something that just takes time. So to me, that's where they have to get better, is just being used to each other and getting comfortable with each other on the court. And again, that does not mean they don't like each other. It just means they haven't played together before.
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely play with someone and, let me rephrase that because, again, I don't want to lead folks down the wrong path. You can absolutely get along with a teammate, like best friends, live together, all that good stuff, and your styles clash. I think that's a great point. I think it's important that you framed it that way, kind of listing all these guys that came back, because all the guys that came back aren't starting right now, right? Like some of them are having to find new places. And, I think a lot of folks have talked about, we talked about it here, like Leaky Black, figuring out what is his role. Other guys seeing reduced minutes. Sean, Sherrell touched on the chemistry piece. What do you see right now from a style of play that is giving these guys hiccups? I think some of the consternation has been, you're transitioning from a too big to a one in, too big in the post to a 1 in 4 out type play. Combine that with the fact that the defensive play has been incredibly lacking. What do you see, whether it's schematically or just from a learning a new style, that's causing this team some hiccups?
Well, I mean, I definitely agree with the chemistry point Shaw brought up, so can touch on that. I mean, I think the two other, or I guess really the one thing that is causing hiccups is the lack of identity from this team. I think that was almost the exciting part of the transition to Hubert and everything you were expecting, from kind of the change in terms of maybe a modernization. But instead, you have a team where you don't, going back, it was offensive rebounding. They're going to push the tempo, things of that nature. But here, you can't really say, well, they can hang their hat on this offensively. Defensively has been, once again, they're ranked sub 100, which I don't think they had been in Roy's era as well. So there's really kind of a lack of identity on both sides of the ball as to who is Carolina. From a 3-point shooting standpoint, they're shooting the ball really well. They're shooting 41%, but in terms of their attempts, they're bottom half in the country in terms of their 3-point rate. So, I think that is definitely an area offensively where they need to be trying to get more looks, because that is an area that they have the talent, and from the guard perspective have seen the early improvement. But just going to the chemistry standpoint, I think Brady Manick had the post-game interview that everybody read and was talking about, and going back and watching the game afterwards, I mean, he was just having no fun out there at all. And part of it was he was out there running up and down the court, and the look on his face, he was just having, was not enjoying being out there. And I think that's the question for how many of them are actually enjoying being out on the court playing together, because and Manick had his faults for sure, but when he does touch the ball moves a lot quicker. Versus when anybody else has it, it's not moving that quick, or they're not hitting that open person. So that was kind of long-winded, but it all goes to the identity and just kind of lack of chemistry that they have developed at this point in time.
And Joey, let me jump in. Sean, I want to ask you something. So you said lack of identity. Do you think that filters down into role definition as well? Is if the program right now, and I would say the program, that sounds drastic. If the team right now through 6 games doesn't have an identity, it's kind of hard for individuals to know their role. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I still think nobody knows what, besides maybe Leaky, what their role is. And you have a lot of guys that are not, say the first round NBA talent, but all have, whether they tested, in terms of Dawson and Armando. They had, in terms of Caleb, had a lot of expectations placed on them, or Manic, who's at his last year. They all have expectations of what they want to do afterwards. And, you watched a lot of Baylor this weekend, and all their guys were scoring between 8 to 15 points. And nobody was really scoring more than that. And I think it goes back to a quote in the role of, there's too much up in the air, especially like Kerwin Walton, for instance. I mean, he's kind of been hot and cold, but he's a guy, I think, okay, you should be trying to get him open threes. He's one of the top shooters in the country. RJ Davis, you're really struggling trying to finish in the paint. You're shooting 26%. Let's look for open shots and moving the ball around. Manic, you need more than 5 shots per game. You should be getting, 10, putting the ball in your hands, and, he's probably the best passer in the half court set. So there's a lot of players, to your earlier point, Sherrell, and there's a lot of individual talent, but it just hasn't been put together. And I think each game is very different in terms of the role. It's almost like who's hot, but it's all kind of mano-a-mano type in my mind.
So I love that you said that. Also want to go back to what you said about Manic and how the ball moves better when he's there. He absolutely reverses the ball better than anybody in the roster. And it's crazy that it's coming from a 4-man. But Sherrell, Sean talks about kind of a lack of identity with this team. Do you think that's fixable?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think all that stuff is connected. We talked about we're really saying the same thing in different ways when we talk about chemistry and identity, and what was the other one? Role definition. All that will come just with time, I think, with experience. Hubert Davis has the job of making sure that he and his coaching staff convey to the players what exactly it is you want me to do. Do you want me to be this guy, or do you want me to be, this guy? And each player has to, take that in, understand it, apply it in practice, and then apply it in the game. So I think that's just a matter of time. They're in practice 30 something, I think, by now. So it's just getting comfortable with each other and playing more games. Now, if this is the same issue in March or the same issue in late January, early February, then you can say, okay, well, maybe there's something, amiss with this personnel, because it would have been the same issues over, 2 different coaches and 2 different types of systems. So then you can say, okay, well, maybe it's just, like I said, personnel, or how these guys fit together versus the actual system being the issue.
Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of time to kind of work that stuff out, and it just takes repetitions.
Sean, if I'm a UNC fan and an Inside Carolina subscriber, what are some things that I can see or look for in the team's play that indicate to me that, hey, they're starting to find some identity? Are there specific stat columns I can look at? Are there specific things from individual players that might indicate that some of that identity is being found?
Yeah, I mean, you look at their stats, whether it's regular or advanced, and for the most part, especially offensively, the majority of players are better. Caleb's over 100 offensive rating, so is RJ Davis, et cetera. I think one thing we always talked about last year was the struggle to get to 7 made 3-pointers last year. Mm-hmm. This year, once again, going back to 3-point shooting, they've 8, 9, 7, 12, 10, 7, but I would have thought there would have been a lot more attempts going on, going back to that earlier point. I think, but also that comes with moving the ball quickly and finding open shots. So I mean, I think offensively, can they increase their 3-point volume as well as kind of their assist to turnover ratio? I think that can show that the team is playing a little closer together in terms of knowing where they like the ball. But then, defensively, I think we saw some changes in UNC Asheville in terms of how they were defending. Now that did lead to a lot of wide open 3-pointers that UNC Asheville just wasn't hitting. So coming against Michigan, who is struggling shooting the 3, but they do have some very capable shooters, now do they catch fire? So I think, once again, defensively, can they start holding their opponents to under 1 point per possession? Because that's been a struggle throughout this year. Defensively, of not really having that anchor in the paint and not having the guards that are able to, really get through the ball screens.
Yeah, you've said before that this team is made up to where it doesn't have that rim protector, and I think that's a great point. We've heard Hubert Davis talk about, different position players on this roster being great positional defenders, and I'm not going to really dive into that, but Sherrell, you followed a lot of these guys since they were early in their high school days. Does UNC have a guy on the roster right now that can take the lead and be, uh, for lack of a better term, I don't think it necessarily has to be a defensive leader, but somebody that can set the tone with their defense?
Yeah, the point guard sets the tone of any defense. I mean, I think that's basketball 101. If there's more pressure on the ball, it's harder to do all the things that the offense want to do. The whole idea of cut the head off of the snake, that kind of thing. So I think it starts with Caleb and RJ, whoever is playing lead guard at that moment. You have to do whatever it takes to try and help contain that dribble penetration. I mean, they're giving up just straight line drives for layups. I mean, time and time again, and they are better players than that. And I think it's just a matter of focus and awareness and intensity, all that stuff mixed up together. Because in the end, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I think novice basketball minds like myself and others probably don't understand about the coverages, about how to push someone to one side, how to cover a screen, how to drop, all that good stuff, how to hedge, all that good stuff. And in the end, I'm a big proponent of just trying hard, especially on defense. I joke about remembering the Titans all the time, but when they tell Petey to just go out there and cover the guy, Petey goes and covers the guy, and that helps everything out. So just go out there, cover your man, do what needs to be done on defense. I think I get it. I don't want to diminish it and say it's not complicated, but I think in the end, it is simple in that you just have to guard your man and be effective doing that. And if everybody does that consistently, as opposed to maybe trying to freelance or try to get a steal here or there, just is very, very Georgia Tech Paul Johnson defense, assignment defense is what people always used to say. Just handle your guy, and if you handle your guy, I think things will work out.
Well, you sugarcoated that well enough that even talking about it in generalities, you didn't make Sean's head explode by listening to you. So I think that's actually a great start. And also want to give you a little more credit than that. I don't think you're as primitive of a basketball mind as you said you were. All right, so Sean, we've talked a little bit about the defensive issues. I have seen North Carolina this year with my own two eyes. I have seen them create turnovers in the passing lanes around the perimeter. Sherrell talked about, guys that are playing the point, just focusing more and locking in more on it and quote unquote, trying harder. Do you think that this team has the ability to create, back to your point about creating identity, can they be a team that starts their offense and starts their transition by getting into the passing lanes closer to half court? Has that been a fluke, or is that something that can become more a part of who they are?
Well, given where they're at right now, there's really nowhere to go but up.
Not what I was going for, but yes, I hear you.
But in terms of potential, I mean, I think there's a little bit of improvement, but once again, it's only 6 games, but at the same time, I would be surprised at seeing a drastic turnaround, especially come the end of the month when we're getting into ACC play. I think there are two between Caleb Love, just given his wingspan and length, when he's on the ball, has the potential. And then, Leaky Black, same thing. And he's been playing well. And I know, I'm usually pretty tough on him on these podcasts. When you look at, KenPom block percentage, he's doing all right, but he's not getting any steals. And he's kind of, that small forward guardian on the wing. So I think he's the other guy with the potential. And then you have RJ. That's going to be hard just given his size. And then you have Kerwin, who, I think he's been playing fairly well defensively, especially in man-to-man situations when his opponent tries to drive. So he's more of kind of force a tough shot versus deflections. But once again, that just creates easier opportunities in transition. That then goes to, I don't have a lot of confidence in them in transition at this point in time in terms of them being able to finish unless it's wide open as well. So that's another area of improvement. But right now the opportunities have been slim to none.
Okay, last thing I want to hit you guys with before we start talking about Michigan. I don't want to totally belabor these last two games, so let's talk about something positive. Sean, what's something you've seen from this team that you like, as opposed to maybe what was on the roster last year prior to the end of the season?
I was going to say Armando just because he's been dominant, but I think he was dominant last year. I think he's increased it, but he's been the bright spot for sure. But that's similar to last year. So I would say, once again, the outside shooting has been the improvement point, where for the most part you have 3 to 4 guys on the court that are going to be able to shoot well. But once again, it's just the volume is not there to kind of fully take advantage of what they've been focusing on.
Sherrell, what's something you like that you've seen earlier this year?
Yeah, I think the offensive balance has been pretty good. Not necessarily on a game-to-game basis, because there's still a lot of, one guy has 25 and then everybody else has 9.
Right.
There's been that's happened a couple of times, but just the fact they have so many guys at different positions who can score, I think has been a positive. Caleb has had 20 or more. RJ's had 20 or more. Brady's had 20 or more. Armando's had 20 or more, and Dawson's had 20 or more. So there's that kind of versatility, and they all really do it in different ways. The last few years, the Cole Anthony year was, Cole in a prayer, or I guess when Cole had got hurt, it was Garrison Brooks in a prayer. And then last year, I think they had 4 guys who did it, but it was just not as fluid, not as easy. So I do think this year's team offensively is aesthetically, at least, much easier to watch from that perspective. So I think that's a good thing, and I think it'll bode well for them, especially when you get into March and some of those tight games. That's when I think scoring and the ability to get your own shot and the ability to make tough shots really comes in handy. And when you have a team who has 4 or 5 of those guys, who knows what could happen in March? I mean, how many times have we seen it where a team who has a bunch of scorers, or a team who has a guy who gets really, really hot in March can, go a long way. I think North Carolina really hasn't had that the last couple of years. So it's good, I think, moving forward, that they have it this year with 5 or 6 guys who can really score.
Yeah, the counterfactual to that too is when you get into March, teams like to take away your best player. And if you have guys that are all capable of being your best player on a different night, it makes it harder for teams to game plan for you. But again, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse there. But I appreciate you guys coming along with me and saying something positive. I'm actually going to trump both of you and say something incredibly positive right now. JohnnyTshirt.com. I mean, is there anything more positive as the calendar flips over to December, people start getting ready for the holidays, and you're thinking about your holiday gift list? Is there anything more positive than Johnny T-shirt? I think not. Somebody tried to tell me the other day, it's like, hey, why don't you go to some other website to get your Carolina gear? And I said, nay. I said, I will go to JohnnyTshirt.com because they just finished their Black Friday sale. They had 20% off everything. Plus, Inside Carolina subscribers know that they get an extra 10% off the top of that. So, I mean, I'm not a math major here, but that sounds like, just deals and deals everywhere. What I would encourage to our listeners, go to JohnnyTshirt.com if you are not stopping into the store on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Check out all of their new arrivals. They have holiday stuff. If you want to put up a UNC stocking by your chimney with care, they've got said stocking for you. If you would like to deck your halls in Carolina blue, they can hook you up. If you are looking for, a partridge in a blue pear tree, they may be able to get that for you. If they do not have it, I'm sure you could reach out to their customer service department. They can tell you how to get your hands on such. But all I'm telling you is go to JohnnyTshirt.com. Take care of them, or let them take care of you. But we appreciate all the support that they give to Inside Carolina and the support they give to this podcast. And we just want to make sure that you're making a list and checking it twice, because JohnnyTshirt.com is the place to do that. thankful to them. Going to take a quick break, let the national guys drop their ads in here. We'll be right back to get you ready for the Tar Heels versus Michigan and Sean Moran's favorite intra-conference rivalry. All right, we're back. Thanks for sticking around. Joey Powell here, Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan there. Coast to Coast podcast for you. This week, the Tar Heels have had a decent layoff in a sense that they have not played. They will not have played for 7 days when they lace them up against Michigan Wednesday night at 9:15. Michigan, of course, ranked number 20 as of the most current AP poll. Right now, Michigan, I think, has dropped 2 games already this year. I have not had a chance to watch them, but just looking at their roster and knowing some of the guys they have, they still have quite a few upperclassmen. They play a lot of guys, have played a lot of guys earlier. Hunter Dickinson, I think, is the one that everybody is most familiar with. But Eli Brooks has also done a great job from the guard spot for them. He's averaging 15.7 points per game. Dickens is just below that, just below 15 points per game, 8 rebounds. And he actually passes the ball really well for a big man. So if you're one of those folks who likes to see big versus big, if the Purdue game between Bacot and Zach Edey did not do it for you, then Bacot and Hunter Dickinson, or potentially Hunter Dickinson v. Dawson Garcia, should do that for you. Guys, what do you see, and I'll start with you, Sherrell, what do you see coming in to this game that makes you think the Tar Heels can actually get a big win early in the season?
As we just talked about, offensively, they're a really good team. And Michigan right now is not a team who turns you over a ton. Their turnover percentage is very similar to North Carolina. So turnovers have been a bugaboo for this UNC team, this kind of core group, the last couple of years. So hopefully the fact that Michigan's not great at forcing them will give UNC some extra possessions and some extra shots. I'll let Sean get into the kind of the deep dive into Michigan. I was going to just kind of talk about a little bit about the recruiting stuff so far between the two, because it is interesting in that Hunter Dickinson and Armando Bacot played together on the AAU circuit for Team Takeover a few years ago. And they were really probably the only AAU team who played 2 traditional bigs. Armando Bacot was the 4 and Hunter Dickinson was the 5. And that team, I think, lost 1 game the entire summer, something like 39-1 or something like that. Anthony Harris was on that team as well. And those 2 worked really well together. And the thing that you always noticed about Dickinson was his ability to get Armando the ball from the top of the key when Armando was calling for it on the low block. So it, again, speaks to his ability. He's done it in college. Frankly, I did not think he was going to be this good in college, at least not in year 1 and the very beginning of year 2. So he's someone that the North Carolina staff knows very, very well. He had an offer from UNC in that same class as Walker Kessler and Dawson Garcia and Dayron Sharp. Hunter Dickinson was right there too. And the other guy who kind of has a UNC connection is Caleb Houston. Was one of UNC's top targets last year on the wing. Actually was Dayron Sharp's roommate at Montverde Academy down in Florida. UNC really wanted him, and he just kind of went in a different direction. So that is the recruiting angle, is that those 2 guys, the UNC staff knows really, really, really well.
Yeah, and Caleb Houston, of course, is a bit of a matchup nightmare, too, at 6'8" on the perimeter. He's just a really athletic kid. I am excited to see him play. I do not want him to go typical UNC offer, or non-UNC committed offered opponent, as folks who listen to this podcast know what that reference is to. But, Sean, just sitting here looking at Michigan, they've got wins against Buffalo. They beat Prairie View. They beat UNLV. And they beat Tarleton, something called Tarleton State by 11 points. No offense to any Tarleton State listeners here, but I've never heard of that before. But they lost to Seton Hall by 2, and they got absolutely boat raced by who I think is a good Arizona team just a couple of weeks ago. How do you feel like UNC matches up with this squad? I mean, Michigan's trotting out 2 guys that are 7 foot, right? How do you feel like the Tar Heels match up personnel-wise against Michigan?
I mean, I think it's a good matchup. I think right now, Ken Palm has Michigan favored on the road by a few points, but I think part of that is still based on some of last year's formula. But I think Michigan, Very different than UNC. Obviously, last year Michigan had a great season, but they lost. They did lose a lot. So I think expecting them to just kind of step in where they were last year was, was not a good projection in terms of where they started, just because they did lose so much of their senior leadership. Obviously, they returned Dickinson, who's been having another heck of a year, but the other guys are still trying to kind of find, almost find their role similar to UNC. From a transfer standpoint, Devontae Jones, came from Coastal Carolina, so he's trying to find his way at a higher level. And from a shooting perspective, we talked about that. They're shooting 29% from three, but they do have Eli Brooks, who's very capable, and Caleb Houston, who has not been shooting the ball well, but I think, from our discussions on here when UNC was recruiting him, I think has the potential to be one of the top shooters in his class. So I think it's a lot of players that, similar to UNC, are trying to find, outside of Dickinson, are trying to find their role and their identity and playing together. I think UNC trumps them on a depth perspective, but once again, it's also a little easier if you're only playing 7 or 8, to kind of find your role. It'll be interesting to see how Michigan shoots, especially in the Dean Dome, which UNC has been known to give up some hot shooting performances to those that haven't been coming in. So Eli Brooks and Houston are the ones to watch out for, but I think the Dickinson Baycott matchup will be a fun one, especially given their past. But for UNC, we were talking about March. I mean, this is almost a must win, because you have Michigan at UCLA, or not at UCLA, but in Vegas. That one's going to be a long shot, I think, at beating them. So you really have Michigan, and then you have a pretty subpar ACC in terms of who is left on the schedule. So this is a pretty big game in terms of making it into March and being having some type of success in that month.
It reminds me of the 2018-19 season. So Carolina had went out to, I think it was Vegas, and they lost to Texas, and they lost to someone else. So they were, something like 4-2, 5-2. And Gonzaga was coming into the Smith Center on, I think, the first Saturday in December. And there was talk, because at that time, nobody knew how good Kobe White was going to be.
Yeah.
We didn't know Cam Johnson was going to have a historical shooting season. So at that time, it was kind of like, man, if they don't win this game against Gonzaga, when's their next chance to get a really impressive win? And that is when I think Seventh Woods had like the game of his life that night. And Carolina got the win, and off they went. And eventually became a number 1 seed. Not saying that's going to happen if UNC beats Michigan on Wednesday, but this game kind of reminds me that there is some pressure already. And Joey, you've been to the Smith Center this year, but to me, from my untrained eye, from my couch here in Concord, it doesn't seem like the Smith Center has been a huge home court advantage thus far in 3 games. And maybe that's the opponent, maybe that's COVID. I don't know what it is, but it needs to be loud in there to give them a little extra bump on Wednesday.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to touch on. Like, you guys make great points about opportunities to get Q1 wins, and this is absolutely, everybody's grandma used to always say, you got to make your stew when you have the vegetables. Well, this is one of the last few times that they're going to have their vegetables before they get into conference play, and like Sean said, the ACC looks to be down this year, just based on early returns. Sherrell, to your point about, and by the way, before we move on, I do want to at least point out some of these offensive rankings for Michigan right now are just not good. They're 336th in the nation in field goals attempted, 323rd in 3 points or in 3-pointers made. They're right at 300th in 3-point percentage. Sherrell, to your point earlier about they don't pressure the ball really well, they're 334th in steals created per game. So they're not off to a great start either, and this is an opportunity for the Tar Heels. To your point about the environment, I would like to attribute the lack of attendance earlier this year being to 7 o'clock games in the midweek against bad opponents. The Friday night against Brown, I wasn't there, but I think that crowd was a little better than the other two. But to your point, I would expect that Wednesday night against the likes of Michigan will probably be a different story. And, to anybody listening, if you have tickets, go to this game and be loud. I think this team is going to need some home court advantage, and if any of you have the inclination to do so, I think this would be an opportunity to help establish that. All right. Before we get out of here, anything else you guys want to add before whether it's about Michigan or anything else, before we sign off for the evening? Sherrell, I'll go to you first.
I'll add on the recruiting front, Michigan and North Carolina are really battling more often than I think they did in the past. Juwan Howard is a really good recruiter, has some good classes already come in just in his short amount of time there. The latest example really was Seth Trimble. Before his visit to UNC, pretty much everyone thought Seth Trimble was going to go to Michigan. Whether or not that was the case, I don't know. Obviously, he's signed with UNC, but just something to keep an eye on, that UNC and Michigan see each other a lot more than they used to on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think most folks have already forgotten about Seth Trimble since he's made his commitment and has now signed with the Tar Heels. But that's a great point. They're starting to see each other more often, and that is a tip of the cap to Juwan Howard. Sean, do you have anything you want to add before we sign off for the evening?
Obviously Michigan's a huge game, but so is the second one of the week at Georgia Tech to kind of kick off the ACC season.
How is it already conference season, man? How does I hate you, new ACC?
And I feel UNC has they've lost the last two to Georgia Tech. I feel both times they've maybe should have got the win, but you could kind of see it coming where they weren't able to put it away when they had the opportunities, and then in the last few minutes Georgia Tech took over. Once again, two really big games this week, and then from a high school recruiting standpoint, Seth Trimble as well as Tyler Nickel begin their seasons this week, so can start talking about how they are doing, because I think there will their shoulders will be heavy come next season possibly, so it'll be important to see them playing well.
Well, and Georgia Tech will be playing against Wisconsin this week. But I'm just going to assume, until I see him not there, I'm going to assume that Jose Alvarado is still playing for Georgia Tech until I see him not on the floor and then playing a game. So, but they actually, Georgia Tech so far this year, I believe, is like 5-1 with an opening loss to Miami of Ohio, but not sure who their wins have been against. But they will be playing Wednesday night as well against Wisconsin, so our listeners will have a chance to check them out. Guys, I appreciate it, as always. I love that you come in here and you're gamers and you bring it, and you always have lots of good insight, especially on what has been a couple of weeks of tumult for this basketball program. But appreciate you listening. Appreciate what it is you bring to the show. Appreciate everybody. Appreciate everybody watching and tuning in out there. I think you guys help us be better. I would appreciate if you would leave us a rating or a review. 5 stars only, please. This holiday season, we don't want bad reviews. But if you don't like what you're hearing, shoot us a quick email. Let us know about it. We'd appreciate it. Guys, thank you so much. I will talk at you sometime very soon. Appreciate Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. Very thankful for John Siegley for producing. And until next time, this has been the Coast to Coast Podcast. For Sean Moran, for Sherrell McMillan, I'm Joey Powell. We will catch you next time.